It began as nothing more than an annoyance. A small, nagging frustration that could be brushed aside at first, but one that grew larger with every passing week. The homeowner had always trusted that the packages left at their doorstep would remain there until they returned home from work. For years, the deliveries came like clockwork, resting neatly on the porch, untouched by anything other than the elements. But lately, that trust was being chipped away, one missing box at a time. The first package was a modest one, a household item ordered online, nothing flashy or expensive, but still essential. When it failed to arrive, the assumption was simple enough: perhaps the carrier misplaced it or left it at a neighbor's door by mistake. It wasn't unusual, and the matter was quickly resolved with a replacement. But then it happened again. And again. At first, the homeowner convinced themselves it was a coincidence. Maybe the delivery service was struggling with routes. Maybe porch pirates were prowling the area. But something felt off. The neighborhood was quiet and safe, the kind of suburban cul-de-sac where families left bicycles on the lawn without worry. No one had ever reported theft before, yet somehow, packages left at this one doorstep never seemed to stay there for long. The losses became harder to ignore, small things at first: kitchen gadgets, personal items, inexpensive electronics, then larger ones: holiday gifts meant for family, clothing orders, and specialty items that weren't easily replaced. Each time a tracking number confirmed delivery, the package seemed to vanish into thin air. And each time, frustration grew deeper. The turning point came on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. The homeowner arrived home earlier than usual, only to find a cardboard box sitting neatly against the front door. Relief flickered for a moment, but by the time they returned outside to bring it in, the package was gone. It was as if it had evaporated in mere minutes. That was when suspicion began to take root. And when suspicion grows, it rarely stays hidden for long. Neighbors were casually asked if they had seen anything unusual. Most shook their heads, though one mentioned seeing someone standing near the porch earlier that day. The description was vague, but one detail stood out: the person had been a woman from just a few houses down. A neighbor who was already infamous in small ways, a woman who seemed to thrive on confrontation and entitlement, a woman who had made a reputation for herself in the neighborhood under a single mocking title: Karen. Karen was the kind of neighbor everyone knew, whether they wanted to or not. She watched the street like it was her kingdom, scolding children for riding their bikes too fast, lecturing homeowners about lawn care, and reporting petty violations to the HOA at every opportunity. If a car was parked for more than a few hours in the wrong place, she was the first to complain. If someone's trash can lingered at the curb longer than usual, she sent photos to the board. Her presence was impossible to ignore, and her attitude ensured no one wanted to engage her more than necessary. But now, a troubling question hung in the air. Was she also the one responsible for the missing packages? The homeowner couldn't prove it, not yet. But the pieces were starting to align. Karen's house sat close enough that she could see every delivery truck that rolled down the street. She had a clear view of the porch from her upstairs window. And she was brazen enough, entitled enough, to believe she could take what wasn't hers and somehow justify it in her own mind. The homeowner decided to test the theory. The next few deliveries were tracked carefully, with notifications checked obsessively. Each time a package was marked as delivered, the clock began ticking. How long would it last before it disappeared? The pattern was unmistakable. Within an hour or two, sometimes even less, the boxes were gone. It wasn't coincidence. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. Anger simmered beneath the surface. Losing money was frustrating enough, but it was the violation that stung most. The thought of someone walking up to the porch, bold as daylight, and stealing property was infuriating. And if Karen truly was behind it, the betrayal felt even sharper. Neighbors were supposed to look out for each other, not prey on each other. The homeowner knew something had to be done. But they also knew Karen well enough to realize a direct confrontation would only backfire. She thrived on conflict. She would deny everything, twist words, and perhaps even turn the tables to make herself the victim. No, confronting her wasn't the answer. This would require patience, planning, and proof. And so, a plan began to take shape. A plan that would start small, almost invisible, and grow into something undeniable. The homeowner wasn't about to let Karen's smug entitlement go unchecked any longer. If she wanted to steal packages, then she would be handed one worth taking. One designed specifically for her. The bait was coming. But before it could be set, the homeowner needed to be certain. More careful tracking, more observations, more subtle questions among the neighbors. The evidence was circumstantial. But it was mounting quickly. Each vanished box added weight to the suspicion, each sideways glance. From Karen added fuel to the fire. The neighborhood itself seemed to notice the tension. Some whispered that Karen was at it again, up to some new trouble. Others sympathized quietly, shaking their heads and muttering about how she'd finally gone too far this time. But still, no one had caught her red-handed. That, however, was about to change. The homeowner's patience had limits, and they had been tested for long enough. With every new disappearance, the resolve hardened. Karen believed she could act without consequence, that her neighbors were too timid or too unprepared to fight back. But she was wrong. Very wrong. The first step was simple enough: prepare a package. One that looked ordinary, tempting, and perfectly placed. A package that no delivery driver would ever recognize as fake, and that no thief could resist snatching away. Inside would be nothing valuable, at least not in the conventional sense. Its true worth would come in the form of evidence, undeniable and irrefutable. The bait was almost ready. And when Karen took it, the truth would finally come to light. The days of disappearing packages were numbered. The plan required patience, subtlety, and a touch of theater. It was not born from malice but from necessity. Proof, the homeowner decided, was the only way to end this steady theft that had hollowed out their sense of security. Confrontation without evidence would be a gamble. The homeowner needed something concrete, a moment captured that would leave no room for Karen's denials and theatrics. So they prepared a trap that looked ordinary, irresistible, and perfectly ordinary to anyone scouting porch deliveries. First came the logistics. The homeowner spent evenings mapping delivery windows, noting which carriers left packages when, how long it took before someone usually retrieved them, and the small blind spots in the neighborhood's watchful eyes. They observed the angles from which Karen could view the porch, the sightlines from her upstairs windows, and the easiest path from her yard to theirs that wouldn't seem suspicious. They learned how quickly she moved when she thought no one was watching, fast, decisive, with the practiced boldness of someone who believed rules were suggestions. Next, they chose the bait. It had to look like something of value, something that would catch a casual thief's eye and justify the risk of a swift porch raid. A sleek showbox-sized package fit the bill. Externally it was perfect: tracking label, return address, printed barcode, everything a delivery driver would expect to see. Inside, however, was nothing more than packing peanuts and a small, custom-made object that could serve as both lure and evidence. The homeowner hid a tiny GPS tracker inside the box and tucked in a piece of cloth dusted with a fingerprint easy powder, engineered to capture skin oils and smudges without being obvious. The plan was low-tech but ingenious: catch the thief red-handed or, at the very least, capture their route and their touch. Surveillance was the other pillar of the scheme. A neighbor 2 houses down agreed to help after hearing the homeowner's mounting frustration. It was a quiet alliance, born of shared inconvenience and the polite desperation to reclaim neighborhood peace. That neighbor had a security camera pointed toward the street, and the homeowner discreetly borrowed its temporary mobile app access for the coming days. They also rigged a small battery-powered doorbell camera, calibrated to activate on motion, and placed it where a casual thief would scan the package before scooping it up. No grand gestures. No obvious stakeouts, just cameras in the places thieves used most. And eyes where human witnesses were unreliable to anyone watching. The bait looked like an ordinary delivery. It was placed with plausible timing, between scheduled work trips and the usual morning rush, a tracking notification would ping, and a driver would place the box by the door. The homeowner timed the drop for a late afternoon, late enough that neighbors were home to notice, early enough that daylight would provide good camera footage. They posted a comment about waiting for a package in a neighborhood group chat, innocuous, but it seeded the idea that someone might be watching the porch. It also gave them a reason to be outside more often without raising suspicion. Days of watchful waiting followed. Each delivery was tracked, every vehicle that passed the curb was noted. Patterns emerged: the carrier's routes, the times when passers-by strolled by, the elderly couple who walked their dog and always glanced at packages, the teen who skateboarded past without caring. Karen's routines, too, became more predictable. She alternated between sharp bursts of outdoor gardening and long stretches of peering from behind lace curtains. Sometimes she watered plants directly facing the street. Other times she hauled out a ladder to clean upstairs windows, subtle moves that placed her eyes at the exact height to watch a porch. Finally, the day arrived. The homeowner watched the delivery truck pull up from behind the safety of a half-closed curtain. The driver, polite and inattentive to drama, placed the box by the stoop, snapped a photo of the doorstep, and moved on. The tracking app pinged. The homeowner's heart ticked faster, not with fear but with the cold thrill of methodical planning reaching fruition. They moved to the window that offered the best view of the approach from Karen's side and held their breath. Time lengthened and then snapped. Within minutes, a timeline that matched other disappearances. Karen appeared at her front gate. She moved quickly, her silhouette familiar, entitled Cadence. The upstairs blinds shifted. She had seen something, and she did what she always did when opportunity met justification. She crossed the yard with the brisk confidence of someone on a mission, her shoes barely making a sound over the dew-speckled grass. She took the path that avoided the homeowner's direct line of sight, slipping behind the clump of hydrangeas as if to hide her intent beneath the pretense of gardening. From the borrowed camera feed, the homeowner watched as she reached the porch and peered at the box. There was a close-up on the hand that brushed the cardboard, an intimate test of whether the bait would work. The small sensor inside detected movement. The doorbell camera captured the exact moment her fingers brushed the printed label. The GPS tracker activated against its tiny casing, beginning to report her route. The powder inside the package recorded the tiny smear of skin oils, a fingerprint in negative. She lifted the package as though it were a trophy. Her shoulders straightened, the act was almost ritualized. With the kind of practiced ease that comes from repetition, she tucked the box under one arm and retraced her furtive path home, eyes scanning the street as if to ensure no one had noticed. The footage showed her stepping through the gate and into her garage, closing the door with an audible click. The neighbor's camera, through the borrowed app, tracked her small figure disappearing behind a fence. The homeowner felt a mix of vindication and unease. The trap had worked, but what would follow? Evidence was gathered: video, GPS pings, and the powder's promise of a fingerprint. The homeowner did not rush to triumph. They knew the next steps required care. The goal was not revenge for revenge's sake, but the restoration of safety and respect. Still, there was no denying the pulse of satisfaction at seeing the deed finally captured. For months the neighborhood had watched packages vanish and excuses flourish. Now, tangible proof existed. The homeowner took screenshots, saved time-stamped clips, and backed up the GPS data. They messaged the assisting neighbor with quiet thanks and prepared to move forward with the next phase, contacting the delivery company, filing a formal report with the police, and compiling the evidence into a folder that would be impossible to ignore. But first, a final, private step. Before pursuing official channels, the homeowner decided to confirm the powder test and ensure the GPS data's integrity. The bait package had been left deliberately empty of valuables. It could be sacrificed to the cause. The homeowner planned to retrieve the box from Karen's trash, legal, if done with caution and within the bounds of local ordinance, to corroborate what the cameras had shown. If Karen had indeed taken the package, the contents, or at least the powder residue, would be there. If not, the homeowner would have to reconsider their assumptions. Night fell with the quiet tension of an impending reveal. The neighborhood slept on, unaware that a small, slim cardboard box had set in motion a chain that might finally end months of theft. The homeowner lay awake, not celebrating yet, but thinking through every next step with a measured mind. The trap had closed. What it would catch next, the verification, the confrontation. The ripple effect through the block remained to be seen. Morning broke quietly, but the homeowner awoke with a heightened sense of purpose. The bait package had been taken, and the cameras had done their job. The trap was set, the pieces collected, but one final step remained before anything could be acted upon: securing undeniable, physical proof. It was one thing to hold footage and GPS data, it was another to retrieve the object itself from the thief's possession. Karen had carried the package into her garage the previous evening, and if past behavior was any guide, she wouldn't hold on to it long. Packages she stole rarely resurfaced. Some neighbors speculated she returned them to online stores for credit. Others whispered she might sell their contents online. But many believed she simply treated them as her own belongings, folded seamlessly into her household as though they had been hers all along. Whatever her routine, there was a chance, brief but crucial, that the bait box would find its way into her trash. So the homeowner watched. Subtle glances through curtains, cautious steps to the driveway, a measured routine that mirrored any other day in the cul-de-sac. From across the street, Karen emerged mid-morning, carrying a black trash bag toward her bin. The garage door stood open behind her, and for the briefest moment, the homeowner saw it, the brown cardboard box, tossed carelessly atop a stack of flattened grocery cartons near the bin. The homeowner's pulse quickened. This was the moment. Once it was hauled to the curb for pickup, access would be simple. But timing was everything. Approaching too soon risked exposure. Waiting too long risked losing the evidence entirely. Hours later, under the excuse of retrieving their own trash bins, the homeowner walked casually toward the curb. Karen had already retreated indoors. The bait box sat partially crushed among the pile, its shipping label still intact, its cardboard edges dusted with faint smudges. It looked like garbage to anyone else, but to the homeowner, it was gold evidence wrapped in brown paper, carefully, casually. They lifted the box from the pile and slipped it into a lawn bag they carried as cover. To the casual observer, it looked like simple cleanup. Inside, though, was the culmination of weeks of frustration and planning. The homeowner brought it inside with steady hands, resisting the urge to rush. On the kitchen counter, under good lighting, they examined the box. The powder trap had worked beautifully. Along one edge where fingers had curled to lift it, smudges appeared darker than dust, clearly visible even without special tools. A fingerprint kit borrowed from a friend in law enforcement. Discreetly and without questions confirmed what the naked eye already knew: Karen's touch had left its mark. The GPS tracker, too, had performed flawlessly. Its small device had pinged steadily through the evening, charting a path from the homeowner's porch to Karen's garage, then to her kitchen, and finally out to the trash bin where it now rested. The data map drew a line of undeniable truth, tracing the stolen box's journey step by step. And then there was the video. The camera feed had captured everything: Karen approaching, crouching, lifting the package, and carrying it away. The footage was crisp. Her face angled squarely toward the lens for a split second, her identity was unmistakable. Together, the elements formed a trifecta of proof: video, GPS, and fingerprints. No excuses, no denials, no wiggle room for twisting the narrative. Karen had been caught, not just suspected. The homeowner organized the evidence into neat files, the video clips copied to a USB drive, the GPS data printed and highlighted, the photos of fingerprints carefully documented. It felt methodical, almost clinical. Yet beneath the surface was a swell of triumph. After months of losses, frustration, and whispered suspicion, the truth was finally theirs to wield. But what to do next? That question lingered heavily in the air. The temptation to confront her was strong. To march across the street, hold up the box, and demand an explanation. To watch her face as she realized she had been caught red-handed. But such a confrontation would give her room to twist, deny, or lash out. Karen thrived on drama, and public spectacles only gave her fuel. The homeowner knew the smarter path was official channels. This was no longer speculation or rumor, it was theft. Documented and proven. The police could handle it. And perhaps finally restore peace to a neighborhood too long disrupted by Karen's antics. Filing a report meant ensuring consequences she couldn't wriggle free from. So the homeowner prepared. They placed the evidence folder in a neat stack, rehearsed the account in their mind, and scheduled a quiet trip to the police station. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about ensuring the theft stopped once and for all. That evening, while Karen remained blissfully unaware, the homeowner drove into town and walked into the station. The officer on duty listened with interest as the story unfolded, brows raising at the mention of bait packages and powder traps. When the homeowner produced the evidence, videos, fingerprints, GPS maps, the officer's skepticism evaporated. This wasn't guesswork, it was a case. Neatly wrapped and undeniable, the report was filed. Copies of the evidence were taken. The officer assured the homeowner that action would be pursued quickly. Porch piracy wasn't just petty theft. In many jurisdictions, it carried harsher penalties, especially when repeated. With proof in hand, there was little chance Karen could avoid facing consequences. As the homeowner returned home, a weight lifted from their shoulders. For the first time in months, they felt not powerless but empowered. The trap had worked, the truth was secure, and soon, Karen would face the reckoning she had earned with every stolen box. But justice moves at its own pace. Karen remained unaware, for now, of the storm about to descend on her carefully constructed facade of control. She carried on with her routines, watering plants, glaring at passing cars, and peering from her windows as though the neighborhood belonged to her alone. The homeowner, meanwhile, waited with quiet anticipation, knowing the next knock on Karen's door would not come from a delivery driver. It would come from the law. The days following the police report were filled with an unusual quiet. The homeowner went about their routine almost normally, though a subtle tension hung in the air. Each time a police car passed through the neighborhood, they wondered if it was meant for Karen. Each time Karen stepped outside to water her plants or fuss over her yard, the homeowner studied her carefully, watching for the smallest hint that she knew her secret was out. But Karen acted as though nothing had changed. Behind the scenes, however, the wheels of justice were turning. The police had taken the evidence seriously. Porch piracy wasn't a minor nuisance anymore, it was treated as a growing crime problem, and multiple states had enacted harsher penalties to address it. The homeowner's folder of proof wasn't just enough to open a case, it was enough to ensure. Karen couldn't brush it off as some neighborhood misunderstanding. A detective was assigned to follow up. He visited the homeowner within the week, asking additional questions, reviewing the footage, and inspecting the bait box firsthand. The fingerprint smudges made the detective's eyes light up. Physical evidence tied to a suspect was a gift in cases like these. The GPS tracker logs only reinforced what the camera had already made obvious. Karen's home was ground zero for the thefts. The detective left with the evidence carefully packaged, promising updates soon. For the homeowner, relief mixed with a nervous anticipation. Reporting Karen felt empowering. But now came the waiting game, the slow, deliberate process of investigation, warrants, and charges. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to sense something brewing. Word traveled quickly, as it always did. A few neighbors noticed the police car idling outside the homeowner's house during the detective's visit. Whispers began in driveways and on porches. Someone had finally done something about the package. Thief. And though no one said her name outright, everyone knew who they were talking about, Karen. Of course, couldn't resist the shift in atmosphere. She seemed more agitated than usual, peering suspiciously at conversations that hushed when she walked by. She lingered at the mailbox longer, scanning faces for clues, as if she could sniff out secrets by sheer force of will. The homeowner could see it in her posture. Karen knew something was happening, but she didn't yet know what. That uncertainty gnawed at her, and she grew more irritable by the day. Then came the visit. It happened on a sunny afternoon when most of the neighborhood was home. A marked police cruiser rolled slowly down the street, turning onto Karen's driveway with deliberate precision. Two officers stepped out. their presence commanding attention without a word. Curtains shifted, blinds tilted, the quiet cul-de-sac transformed into a stage, and everyone knew this was the scene they had been waiting for. Karen answered the door with her usual bravado, standing tall with one hand on her hip. Her posture screamed annoyance at the interruption. But the moment the officers began speaking, her demeanor shifted, her head jerked back, her mouth opened, and her arms flailed in gestures of outrage. From across the street, neighbors couldn't hear her words, but her body language said everything. She was indignant, defensive, caught off guard. The officers remained calm, one holding a clipboard while the other gestured occasionally toward the garage. Karen stomped her foot, shook her head violently, and pointed repeatedly at the homeowner's house. Her face reddened with every word, her hands slicing the air in wide arcs. Then came the moment no one expected. One officer produced a small evidence bag, the bait box. He held it up in plain view, and Karen froze. Her expression hardened, her bluster faltering for just a heartbeat, then she launched into another tirade. But the damage was done. The sight of that box in police custody told every neighbor exactly what they needed to know. The exchange lasted nearly 20 minutes. Karen refused to step aside at first, planting herself in the doorway like a barricade, but eventually, the officers moved past her, entering the home. More shouting followed from inside, muffled but intense. Minutes later, the officers re-emerged. One carrying additional items in bags, evidence. No doubt perhaps other stolen packages finally being uncovered. Karen trailed them, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. She waved her arms toward the neighbors' houses as though demanding they bear witness to her persecution. Some curtains snapped shut, unwilling to be caught staring, but others remained cracked just wide enough to watch. The neighborhood had endured her antics for too long. Now, they wanted to see the fall. The officers spoke a final time at the door before leaving. They didn't arrest her on the spot, but the implication was clear. This was far from over. Karen remained in the doorway long after the cruiser drove away, her chest heaving, her glare sweeping across the street like a spotlight. She had been exposed, and she knew it. That night, the street buzzed with quiet excitement. Neighbors traded whispers about what they had seen, replaying the afternoon like a neighborhood soap opera. Some admitted relief that the thefts might finally be ending. Others worried what Karen would do next. After all, she wasn't the type to admit guilt gracefully. If anything, the exposure would likely push her into even greater outbursts. The homeowner, however, felt a deep sense of vindication. The plan had worked exactly as intended. The police had the evidence, Karen had been confronted, and the neighborhood had witnessed the truth for themselves, for the first time in months. The balance of power shifted. Karen wasn't the aggressor anymore, she was on the defensive. But vindication didn't erase caution. The homeowner knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to quietly accept consequences. She would fight, deny, and lash out with whatever tools she had left. The true test wasn't catching her, it was enduring the storm she was about to unleash. As night fell, the homeowner watched her house from across the street. Lights flicked on and off, blinds twitched open and shut, and her shadow moved rapidly from room to room. She was pacing, plotting, preparing. The police had come once. They would return again. And in the meantime, Karen would not go down quietly. The battle had entered a new phase, one where anger and desperation might drive her further than ever before. The morning after the police visit, the neighborhood awoke to an unusual stillness. Birds sang, sprinklers clicked across well-manicured lawns, and children pedaled their bikes down the sidewalks. But beneath that ordinary surface, everyone's eyes turned toward Karen's house. The garage door remained tightly shut. Her blinds were drawn. Not a single sign of her appeared until late in the day, when she finally emerged, stomping across her yard with an expression carved in stone. Her retaliation began not with a whisper, but with a storm. She stormed from house to house, clipboard in hand, knocking on doors with the force of a battering ram. At each house, she gestured wildly, waving papers in the air, insisting she had been wronged. Some neighbors cracked their doors just enough to see her, offering polite excuses before shutting her out. Others didn't answer at all, pretending not to be home, but a few, too timid to resist, endured her ranting, listening as she claimed the homeowner had fabricated evidence, set her up, and even harassed her with fake boxes. Her story was laced with indignation and victimhood. According to her, she was being targeted in a malicious conspiracy. She claimed the box left at her house was planted, that the footage was doctored, and that the police were being manipulated. She presented herself as the persecuted neighbor, under attack from a supposed troublemaker across the street. But the harder she pushed, the less convincing she became. Her desperation showed in her frantic tone, her trembling hands, and the way her eyes darted toward the homeowner's house as though measuring whether they were watching. Many neighbors simply nodded until she left, then exchanged knowing glances once their doors closed. No amount of theatrics could erase the sight of the police cruiser parked in her driveway, or the memory of officers leaving with evidence bags. Still, Karen wasn't finished. When her door-to-door crusade failed, she escalated in other ways. Overnight, handwritten flyers appeared on porches and tucked into mailboxes. The flyers accused the homeowner of slander, harassment, and setting up innocent people with elaborate traps. She framed herself as a pillar of the community being torn down by lies. The words were bold, underlined, and littered with exclamation points, each sentence brimming with rage. Some neighbors crumpled the papers immediately, others saved them, shaking their heads at the absurdity. The homeowner collected several for the detective, knowing they could serve as further evidence of harassment. Her retaliation grew bolder. One morning, the homeowner discovered their front yard littered with garbage bags torn open, spilling refuse across the grass. It was no coincidence. The placement was deliberate, meant to send a message. Though no camera caught her in the act, the timing was too suspicious. Each incident piled onto the case already being built, and the detective urged patience. Karen was unraveling, and her behavior was only helping. But Karen wasn't only lashing out at the homeowner. She turned her fury inward toward the community as a whole. At the next neighborhood association meeting, she seized the floor, launching into a tirade about false accusations and toxic neighbors. Her voice cracked as she ranted, demanding action against the homeowner, insisting the association should punish them for harassment. But the room had grown weary of her antics. Murmurs rose from the crowd, sharp enough to cut through her monologue. People no longer nodded along with her claims. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanged skeptical looks, and finally, one by one, began to push back. For the first time, Karen found herself outnumbered. When she demanded a vote to censure the homeowner, not a single hand was raised in support. Instead, the meeting ended early, with neighbors dispersing quickly. Unwilling to fuel her tantrum any further, she stormed out, her voice echoing in the emptying hall, furious that her authority had slipped away. The homeowner, though not present at the meeting, felt the shift in power. Karen's influence had been broken. Where once she commanded the neighborhood with intimidation and gossip, now she stood isolated, her credibility shredded by her own behavior. The whispers that once shielded her had become open disdain. Neighbors who had been silent for months began quietly offering their support to the homeowner, some even sharing their own suspicions of missing packages from the past. But with Karen, the danger wasn't in her losing, it was in how she responded to losing. She doubled down, stalking her windows like a sentry, scribbling furiously in notebooks, glaring at anyone who passed her yard. At night, her lights burned late, shadows pacing back and forth. She was plotting something, and the entire neighborhood could feel it. Then came the most reckless act yet. One evening, just after sunset, the homeowner's cameras caught her creeping across the lawn. She wore dark clothes, her hair pulled back, her movements clumsy but determined. She bent over the front porch, fiddling with something near the steps. Minutes later, she darted back across the street, retreating into her house without a sound. When the homeowner reviewed the footage, their stomach dropped. Karen had tried to tamper with the camera itself, smearing something sticky over the lens in an attempt to disable it. She hadn't noticed the secondary angle capturing everything from across the yard. The footage was undeniable. She had crossed from petty retaliation into outright criminal harassment. It wasn't just stolen packages anymore, it was trespassing, vandalism, and escalation. The homeowner knew what had to be done. The detective was notified immediately. And the new footage was handed over. The police had already warned her once. Now, they had reason to return with far greater consequences. The trap had been set long ago, but now Karen was walking herself deeper into it, step by reckless step. The storm she unleashed was no longer aimed outward, it was consuming her, dragging her further into a mess of her own making. And the neighborhood, weary yet fascinated, waited for the next chapter of her downfall to unfold. The escalation could not continue unchecked. Karen's attempt to tamper with the camera was the final thread unraveling the tangled fabric of her denial. The homeowner, now armed with indisputable evidence of trespassing and vandalism, handed everything over to the detective. Within days, the machinery of justice began to move at full force. This time, when the police arrived, it wasn't just for a conversation. A warrant had been issued. The cruiser pulled into Karen's driveway on a gray morning, its flashing lights slicing through the mist. Neighbors gathered discreetly at their windows, some clutching coffee mugs, others whispering to spouses. They had all been waiting for this moment, the crescendo of months of tension. The officers approached her door with firm knocks. Karen appeared moments later, her face twisted with defiance. She shouted, pointed toward the homeowner's house, and shook her fists in the air. But her protest carried no weight anymore. The officers remained calm, explained the warrant, and then stepped inside. The scene unfolded like a slow-motion film. Officers combed through her home, emerging with stacks of packages and evidence bags, some ripped open, others still sealed. Names and addresses scrawled across the boxes told the truth more damning than any argument could. Neighbors recognized items they had long since written off as lost: a blender, a set of shoes, even a child's toy that had never arrived in the mail. Karen's fury boiled over as she realized her secrets were spilling into the daylight. She screamed at the officers, at the neighbors, at the world. Her voice cracked, her gestures became wild, and her face reddened with a rage that bordered on desperation. But rage wasn't enough to stop. What was happening? At last, one officer stepped forward, handcuffs in plain view. Karen recoiled, disbelief flashing across her face. For a moment, it seemed as though she might resist. But reality caught up with her quickly. Surrounded, exposed, and stripped of the control she had wielded for so long, she had no choice. The metal cuffs clicked around her wrists, silencing the last of her protests. The neighborhood fell into a hush as she was escorted to the cruiser. The same woman who had once terrorized them with gossip, intimidation, and theft was now reduced to a figure of disgrace. Her head bowed, her words incoherent. Cameras from doorbells and security systems captured every angle, ensuring her downfall would live on in local memory long after the police left. When the cruiser pulled away, the cul-de-sac exhaled. A weight that had hung over them for months was gone, replaced by a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Conversations that had once been guarded now flowed freely. Neighbors crossed lawns to speak to one another, to compare stories, to shake hands with the homeowner who had set the trap that finally ended it all. The county wasted no time in pressing charges. Theft, trespassing, vandalism, and tampering with surveillance equipment formed a stack of accusations too heavy for even Karen to deny. The evidence was airtight: packages with names, video footage, fingerprint smudges, GPS logs, and flyers. All of it painted a picture of a neighbor consumed by her own arrogance and carelessness. The trial, when it came, was swift. Karen tried to plead innocence, spinning tales of conspiracies and framed jobs, but the jury needed only a fraction of the evidence to see the truth. She was found guilty, her sentence carrying both restitution and community service. For someone who had lorded herself over the neighborhood as if she were untouchable, it was the ultimate humiliation. Back in the cul-de-sac, life began to return to normal. Deliveries arrived without fear, neighbors collected packages from their porches without hesitation, and a sense of safety slowly took root again. The homeowner, once the target of Karen's schemes, was quietly celebrated as the one who had taken action when no one else dared. Karen's house once bustling with her constant presence, grew silent. Her blinds remained shut, her yard untended, her driveway empty. Eventually, word spread that she had sold the property and moved away, unable to face the neighbors she had tormented and betrayed. For the homeowner, the ordeal left behind lessons etched in memory. Patience, preparation, and persistence had turned the tide against someone who believed they could act without consequence. It wasn't just about stolen packages, it was about reclaiming peace, about proving that no one was above accountability, no matter how loudly they shouted. The cul-de-sac, once fractured by Karen's dominance, found unity in her absence. Block parties returned. Children played freely, and neighbors waved to one another without suspicion. The shadow she had cast over the street had finally lifted, replaced by light and laughter. And as for the homeowner, each time an Amazon box landed safely on their porch, it carried more than just its contents. It carried the quiet satisfaction of a battle fought, a victory earned, and a reminder that even the most determined Karens of the world could be brought down when justice and a little creativity stepped in.